health is synonymous with robust function in the systems that we need for life, and disease is dysfunction in those same systems. So health equals function, and disease equals dysfunction. So any technique that improves function will improve health.
There's obviously a lot of doctors out there who are well known on the podcast circuit. You see them all over the place. And then there are others who I consider to be like diamonds in the rough who I like to have on my show and expose to the world. And today's guest is one of those individuals. He's out of Portland, Oregon, Dr. Cody Strodtman. This is his book, by the way. I'm holding it up for those of you watching the video. Your Life, Your Choice. And Cody sent this to me. And as you can see, I've got plenty of pages folded over. I always, when I interview an author, just read the book cover to cover and like to take a deep dive into the things that I think are really going to help you, the listener, learn some new things. So the show notes as we go through this are going to be at bengreenfieldlife.com/adaptive. bengreenfieldlife.com/adaptive because, Cody, you have the subtitle here for Your Life, Your Choice, The Rise of Adaptive Medicine. So I guess we should just address the elephant in the room right away. What is adaptive medicine?
Great question. So adaptive medicine came out of a 10-year obsession to try to answer one question, and that is, what is health? During that time, I became a naturopathic doctor and acupuncturist, where I was trained to diagnose disease and treat and manage it with a whole bunch of tools, ranging from pharmacology, supplements, herbs, nutrition, and more.
By the way, how long does that take to do naturopathic medicine and acupuncture?
For me, it took 6, and that was the faster time track. So it ranges between 4 if you're just wanting to get the ND, and they got 5 years. So it varies. But for me, it was a 6-year sentence.
Yeah. And did you grow up kind of like in the, not to stereotype, but like the hippie patchouli oil, alternative medicine, mom gives you homeopathics instead of vaccines type of environment, or did something else draw you to naturopathy?
Yeah, not at all. I grew up born and raised in Kansas, more rural. It's opposite, in fact, very anti-hippie and just more of the conventional route. But I got to naturopathic medicine for various reasons, one of which is my mother's sickness. And after that, I just really wanted to answer what is health. And I realized that pills can be helpful in emergent conditions, but they're not going to boost overall health. So that's why I went the route that I did, to understand health so I could help improve myself and help others improve their health as well.
Okay. Yeah. What happened with your mom?
Cancer. So she got breast cancer and then got remission from that, and then ovarian cancer. And that was a ordeal.
Wow.
And eventually she just succumbed to that. And that really hit me hard. I was in naturopathic medical school at the time. And to tell you the truth, Ben, that just turned the tables on a lot of things. She tried almost everything, and that hit me hard and really developed my thought process around adaptive medicine, which is attempting to transform individuals' life into living, breathing medicine by their own behaviors. I'm of the opinion that we have everything that we need to prevent, treat, and oftentimes reverse diseases. We just need to put that into action. And that's what the book and the philosophy of adaptive medicine is all about.
Yeah. And assuming this goes beyond just positive thoughts and the biology of belief, what's an example of like a lifestyle practice you would consider to be medicine?
Oh man, there's so many of them. Many of them that you've already talked about: exercise, functional circadian rhythm being one. The whole premise of adaptive medicine is that adaptation is in and of itself medicine. Because from a physiological perspective, health is synonymous with robust function in the systems that we need for life, and disease is dysfunction in those same systems. It's really that simple. So health equals function, and disease equals dysfunction. So any technique that improves function will improve health. And that is the adaptive process, which follows a very simple protocol: challenge, recover, and repeat. And so when you challenge those systems regularly with the right dose, which I talk about in my book, which is environmental hormesis, allow it to recover and align that with a functional circadian rhythm, you will improve function, your health will improve, and your overall a quality of life will get better. So that is adaptive medicine.
Environmental hormesis. So basically, you're throwing challenges at your body's adapting, your cells are growing more resilient, and you're just basically weaving that into a daily cycle.
Exactly.
Okay. All right, cool. So I want to talk about some of these environmental hormetic stressors and things that help us to adapt. You cover a lot in the book. We're going to kind of dip our toes in here and there. But one thing that I noticed early on in the book, you're talking about circadian rhythm. And you say it's a 24-hour cycle, which I think a lot of people know. And then you also say it contains 3 what you call ratios. What does that mean?
Right. So I would agree. Most people have heard of the 24-hour clock or the circadian rhythm and associate it with the clock. But the ratios are what sets that clock. And each ratio has a stimulatory input that wakes the body up and a recovery input that brings it back down into rest and recovery so it can repair. So the first ratio is light versus darkness. Light, especially in the early morning, anchors the clock. It tells the brain that it's time to get up and get after it. And then also sets a timer for melatonin release later in the day, which improves sleep. So that's number 1. Number 2 is movement versus rest. Most of the body isn't exposed to light, so movement becomes one of the stimulatory inputs by increasing metabolic demand. And of course, rest helps you shift your body back into recovery. And then the third ratio is eating versus fasting. Eating will literally ring the dinner bell for the trillion microbes residing in your digestive tract, impact hormones and neurotransmitters, and a whole bunch of other things that are great for the body. Whereas fasting gives your body a break and allows it to recover.
I just got back from Germany a couple of days ago, and what you just described is, I think, one of the keys beyond Ambien, modafinil, and all these pharmaceuticals people use for managing the circadian rhythmicity that just tends to get just shattered during travel. And I mean, like what you just described is so simple, but I mean, like if I get to, let's say I'm traveling back east and I get to my final destination at, I don't know, like 6 p.m. and I want to adapt super fast. That means that I'm not doing the, I don't know, you hear about like Joe Rogan and The Rock. They talk about first thing, go hit the gym. The gym is bright lights, it's movement, and typically post-workout fueling. I will opt instead for sauna, infrared sauna, walk outside in the dark in the fresh air. And then if I do need to eat, really light. And then the morning, just that's the like blue light overhead in the gym, big protein rich meal. But just those ratios alone when it comes to travel are a game changer.
I wholeheartedly agree. And I like the eating aspect because a lot of people know about light and jet lag. But if your eating balance, your fast fed cycles are off, it's like metabolic jet lag. So ultimately, even with circadian rhythm dysfunction, shift work, when you're traveling, you line those stimulatory aspects up when you want to be active and the recovery aspects up when you need to rest. That is by far the best adaptive approach for circadian rhythm alignment. So you're firing on all cylinders, no matter where you're at or where you're going.
Yeah, Gary Breck has this approach where and he travels a lot more than I do. He only eats, even when he's traveling, at the time that he would normally be eating in his home time zone, if he wants to maintain his circadian clock at his home time zone. So that means like basically you would have a watch and time 1 is the time back home and time 2 is where you're at. And you're only eating when you normally eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner in time 1. I think that's a decent approach if you're just like popping all over the place. But then, the flip side of that is if you're traveling and you're in a location for a longer period of time, like I was in Germany, like I shift my clock more rapidly by eating at the times that they're actually eating in the zone that I'm in. And I'll even go so far as to like, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Like I'm a fan of intermittent fasting, but to get the body onto the clock more quickly, I will make sure I actually have a protein-rich breakfast, sometimes even before hitting the gym, if I want to get adapted more quickly to a time zone.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm unfamiliar about the macros and how that impacts the circadian rhythm. More so the expert in the timing, really. And intermittent fasting is a whole nother topic altogether because a lot of people confuse it with caloric restriction. When, in my perspective, time restricted eating, which is commonly referred to as intermittent fasting, it's a circadian rhythm diet. And to tell you the truth, Ben, like I don't know about protein and how it early in the morning sets up the clock or doesn't. Maybe you could help me out. So that seems to be your go-to strategy. You've had good results with that?
Yeah, the main reason for the protein is I think there is a little bit of an upregulation of the mTOR response that does feed into circadian rhythmicity. So instead of like the green juice for breakfast, opting for like the eggs and olive oil with avocado seems to do a better job for me getting me onto that time zone. But then what you mentioned about intermittent fasting being more of a circadian rhythm thing than a calorie restriction thing, it is interesting because you see studies that compare for weight loss, intermittent fasting, and calorie restriction, and they tend to be pretty even. But I think what a lot of people miss is those studies are just looking at weight loss.
Exactly.
And with intermittent fasting, like you're saying, there's a lot more, right?
Yeah, there's a lot more. So like I said, intermittent fasting, the circadian rhythm, it goes within those 3 ratios. And as you probably know, if any one of those are off, your cortisol is going to be out of balance, your hormones are going to be out of balance, which impacts how you recover, how your metabolism runs. So there's definitely crossover, but the key distinction in which a lot of companies don't make is that caloric restriction is completely different than time restricted eating. It's often lumped in together, and that just makes research and just difficult to try to suss out, well, what's actually being looked at. Is it circadian rhythm biology or overall caloric balance?
Right. And the circadian rhythm biology then is going to affect downstream like inflammation, hormones, et cetera. So yeah, I think having a period of time during a 24-hour cycle where you're not like, shoveling food into your gaping maw it's a good idea regardless of whether you're interested in weight loss.
Exactly. Yeah. It just gives your body that time to recover.
Yeah. Yeah. Breath is another interesting one. You go pretty deep into breath and you talk about some things that people might not think about when it comes to breathing, including you have like one method for improving respiratory function. I think you call it like inspiratory muscle training?
Inspiratory muscle training. I absolutely love it. It's simple and it's very, very straightforward. You breathe through a small hole and this adds resistance, which strengthens your breathing muscles. And this added resistance increases the negative pressure inside the lungs, which is needed to pull air into them by up to 28 times compared to normal breathing. So essentially it's a pressure workout. And the reason why I love it and why this matters is because when you strengthen your breathing muscles, you improve lung and cardiovascular function, which in the real world translates over to better oxygen efficiency, lower blood pressure, and improved athletic performance. And this is a big deal because lung function is strongly associated to be one of the strongest predictors of overall health and longevity. And the best part about inspiratory muscle training is that all it takes is 30 resisted breaths a day. That's it, just 30 breaths a day to get all those benefits. So as long as you're getting resistance on the inhale, you are building those strengthening your breathing muscles, and you can tap into all those adaptive benefits.
Okay, so 30 inhales a day. And by the way, I noticed you mentioned it could lower systolic blood pressure by 9 points, right? So if I'm normally like 129 over 79, I could drop down to like 120 over 79 as an example. But 30 inhales a day, would this be literally like as simple as grabbing a straw, one of those fancy microplastic infused straws, and just pulling in like 30 times?
Yeah, you could do that. You could pucker your lips. You can buy an inexpensive tool. There's plenty of inspiratory trainers out there online. I use the Breather Fit. I'm not associated with this company at all. I just like it. It's been reliable for me. But the key point here is as long as you're getting resistance, you're good to go. And the studies typically show 50 to 75% of an individual's maximal inspiratory pressure, which just means as long as the last few breaths are challenging, similar to lifting, you want your last couple reps to be challenging, but you still want them to be controlled and repeatable. As long as it's within that window, you're going to get those adaptive benefits.
And how fast should it be? Like, is it real quick or like a long drawn out inhale?
Well, there's going to be a resistance. So it tends to be more slow because you're really inhaling and trying to get that resistance. Remember, the negative pressure in the chest can go up to 28. So it tends to be a little bit more long and drawn out, just because it's very, very difficult to do a quick inhale with resistance.
Yeah, I've got this one called the Relaxator, and it kind of looks like a whistle. I'll use that sometimes when I'm walking, and it is a resisted breath in. And I'm sorry, it does not allow you to breathe in through your mouth. So you're breathing in through your nose, but you're breathing out against resistance. So I guess that's more like expiratory muscle training, right?
Yeah, if you're breathing out, it's interesting. The muscles required for exhalation are mostly the abdominal muscles, but you can still blow against resistance like I don't know, like a heavier balloon or like that whistle thing that you use when you walk. You can still get benefits, but the inspiratory muscle training aspect is unique just due from the inhale, adding resistance to the inhale.
Yeah, I did not realize how impactful that was on blood pressure. So big bookmark for those of you out there working on blood pressure. Inspiratory muscle training, 30 per day, just like breathing through a straw or like Cody said, through puckered lips. That was a pretty cool one. I hadn't heard of that before. And then related to breathing, you also talk about carbon dioxide. Tell me about carbon dioxide.
Yeah, and before we get there, I just wanted to touch like the science on inspiratory muscle training, those benefits of reduced blood pressure. The study showed that even after the participants stopped, those results were maintained for 6 weeks after. So it's really a good adaptive response and a very, very easy thing to incorporate into your schedule in regards to lowering blood pressure. And then, so now on to carbon dioxide. Let's talk about why somebody would even want to leverage carbon dioxide in the first place. So carbon dioxide has a powerful effect on the body. When CO2 levels rise, our blood vessels will dilate, and this improves oxygen efficiency, and it tends to calm the nervous system. But when CO2 levels drop, the opposite happens. Our blood vessels will constrict, oxygen delivery decreases, it tends to excite the nervous system. A great example of this would be blowing up a balloon. So all that huffing and puffing will decrease your CO2, which will cause blood vessels in your brain to constrict temporarily and decrease blood flow. So even though you got plenty of oxygen, that's not happening in the brain, which causes the dizziness. So ultimately what people want to do when they train CO2 is to improve their tolerance to it, which is CO2 tolerance, and that's trainable. And and the reason you want to do that is to get all those benefits. You want better blood flow, you want a calm and relaxed state, and you want improved oxygen. And that's what a higher CO2 tolerance does. And there's a couple easy ways individuals can do that. So number one would just be nasal breathing, especially during, say, zone 2 cardio, because the nose will naturally slow the breath, which allows for CO2 retention. The next, very easy, is just breath holds. This causes CO2 levels to increase and trains your body to stay calm when these levels start to rise.
Okay, but by the way, breath holds, does it matter if you do a breath hold on the inhale or a breath hold on the exhale, like full lungs or empty lungs?
That's a good question. So with CO2 training, it's just all about the CO2. So if you do a full exhale, then hold, obviously your breath hold's probably going to be a little bit shortened as long as you didn't hyperventilate beforehand, but you're wanting to build that CO2 tolerance. So really, it doesn't matter in regards to building the CO2 tolerance. But if you're wanting to maximize your breath hold, obviously holding on an inhale would be preferred.
Yeah, and a lot of people, they are focused on HRV, their readiness score, vagal nerve tone. The high CO2 levels, if those are more parasympathetic, that could translate into training for a better HRV, right?
Oh, absolutely. Better HRV, better resting heart rate. It has all sorts of benefits just because it has that calming, relaxing state on your nervous system, along with better blood flow and everything that I've just mentioned.
And you say in the book, anytime you're exhaling longer than you inhale, CO2 levels would rise, and that would have the calming effect, right?
Exactly. And that's why a lot of the breath work centered around improving sleep either requires a short inhale and extending the exhale or holding your breath. It's all back to that basic physiology of increasing that CO2.
I got deep into CO2 a couple of years ago. And then this guy, he's actually a former podcast guest, Anders Olsen. He sent me this thing called the Cardi Haler, CARDI Haler. And I've got a canister of medical grade CO2 on the floor. underneath my desk here, and it attaches to the cardinhaler, which pulls in the CO2. And then there's another tube that goes to a mask that I can put on just at some point during the day. I typically put it on for 15 to 20 minutes while I'm checking emails. And it will feed you anywhere from 4 to 8% carbon dioxide that you just like breathe through this mask while you're working. Have you seen devices like this before?
I have, and that's an interesting topic. So when I was writing this book, I kept coming across papers that said inhaling CO2 at higher levels would reliably put people into an anxious state or sometimes like a full-blown panic attack. And I'm a fairly skeptical guy, so I wanted to see if this was true and have my own experience. So I set up an experiment myself with 7% CO2. I started slow and 2 minutes a day and worked my way up to 20. And to tell you the truth, then the only thing that I noticed was rosy cheeks. And then afterwards, I felt more calm.
Yeah, you don't feel calm during, you feel calm after. Like during, you almost feel like you're a little bit oxygen starved.
Yes. Yeah, you're breathing heavier, things of that nature. And that points to the CO2 tolerance. I think breathing machines like you just mentioned is a great way to passively increase your CO2 instead of breath holding and nasal breathing and all those other tricks that can increase your CO2. So that's been my experience with it. Like what have you noticed doing this every day?
The main thing is vasodilatory effects. So you definitely get, like you mentioned, the rosy cheeks, but almost like more vascularity afterwards, which is indicative of better blood flow, vasodilation, possibly the effect of blood pressure that happens from that. And then you're kind of zenned out. Like I like to do it. Usually I've got a lot of reactive work between about 4 and 6:30 p.m., like leading up to pre-dinner. And I'll pump it out at some point during or right before I start into all of that. And it seems to have this like mild anxiolytic effect.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't surprise me. That doesn't surprise me at all. Have you noticed any long-term benefits other than those immediate Zen-like effects when you're doing it?
Not necessarily that I've quantified. I mean, I stack a lot of stuff during the day, but because you talk about CO2 and, all these things in the book, like how it, dilates blood vessels and activates vagal nerve function. But then there's another really big book that just came out on a host of benefits of carbon dioxide therapy in terms of like vascular function, bone density, goes into neurological function, like a whole bunch of effects that I kind of, fingers crossed, assume that this like 7% CO2 inhalation each day is helping with. I think a lot of people just aren't aware though, that you can actually train your CO2 tolerance and even use machines like that to just like increase your CO2 even more.
I agree. It's definitely on the fringe, and CO2 is considered the bad boy of breathing. Everybody focuses on oxygen. But to tell you the truth, like CO2 is a powerful lever that we all can push to improve oxygen delivery. And it's simple. Like you can modify your breath. There's simple machines like you just mentioned to improve CO2 tolerance, and it has a significant impact on overall function.
Yeah, there's even machines that do it transdermally. Like there's like this, it's almost like a sauna called the Hawkette. It stands for Hypoxia, something carbonic acid transdermal. And it's actually like feeding CO2 into this sauna unit. So it's combining heat, transdermal CO2, and ozone. And then there's this other device that I've come across at a couple of times at health conferences. It literally looks like the Blueberry Boy from Willy Wonka. And it's like this suit that you wear that feeds carbon dioxide into the suit for transdermal absorption.
Have you tried that?
I tried it once. Yeah, it was like, I don't mind putting a mask on while I'm checking emails, but for me to like climb inside a full-on suit and just lay there, I don't think it'd be the best use of my time.
It's a bit much, yeah.
Yeah. Then hypoxia, you also get into this idea of intermittent hypoxic training. So tell me about hypoxia.
In regards to hypoxia, that's in my regards, it's one of the best biohacks for mitochondrial function and oxygen efficiency. By far, it's at the top of the list for that. Honestly, Ben, it's one of my favorite tools. And for individuals, hypoxia is just briefly, it's lowering oxygen. And this happens in the womb. So the fetus is exposed to around 3 to 5 minutes of hypoxia multiple times a day. And researchers have claimed that this improves their antioxidant capacity and stress resilience. And then when we do this in adulthood, it activates over 100 genes responsible for repair and cellular survival, predominantly by activating one particular gene of oxygen regulation, hypoxic inducible factor 1 alpha, which unleashes a cascade of benefits: growth factors, mitochondrial function, oxygen delivery. It's even been shown to increase our circulating stem cells by 50%, which is huge, all by briefly lowering oxygen, briefly being the key word. That's the intermittent part. And most people will get a good shot of hypoxia during high intensity high intensity training, but most of those adaptations will happen in the muscles being worked. Whereas with intermittent hypoxic breathing, you're giving your body a whole hypoxic signal, which impacts the brain, heart, lungs, blood vessels, mitochondria, and more. You're literally priming the system from a whole adaptive response. That's why I like it so much. It's just a minimum effective dose with huge upshot of adaptations to the whole system. And I've developed a breathing technique called the adaptive breath that's anybody can do. And it's free, it's simple, and it has 3 phases if you want to hear more about it.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So the first one is resonant breathing, which just means a 5-second inhale followed by a 5-second exhale. And this calms the nervous system and improves oxygen delivery. And then the second phase is the hypoxic phase, which goes for 3 to 5 minutes and ends with a pressure phase that helps build our baroreceptor sensitivity and trains our body how to adapt to changing pressures. So those 3 components are one round. And ideally, someone would repeat this 3 to 5 times to fully tap into the adaptive benefits.
Okay, I got the resonance part where you're going like 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. I actually just did a big podcast on resonance breathing with Jay Wiles, who even developed like this lamp that kind of lights up that helps walk you through a resonance breathing cycle. It's called an ohm lamp. But then you said you go from that into, you said 3 to 5 minutes of hypoxic training?
Of hypoxic breathing, right.
Hypoxic breathing. So what's that look like?
So it's a breath hold after the initial oxygen phase. And then once that CO2 starts to climb and you get that breaking point, that panicky sensation that we all get, instead of breathing in again, you just take a quick breath, just a quick in and out. And this decreases that CO2, but doesn't fully oxygenate the system. So you can maintain hypoxia for as long as you want. But ideally, we want that to be in that hormetic window, hence the 3 to 5. That's why. So that's how it's done. That's how the hypoxic phase.
Okay. So it's just one massive breath hold where every time you start to get oxygen starved, you're just out real quick and back in.
Very similar to the Soma breath. Are you familiar with the Renegade Pharmacist?
Yeah, the Renegade Pharmacist. He actually was one of the first guys I ever interviewed about breath. I met him like literally in a sauna at an event. I think we were in like Estonia or Finland or one of these Northern European countries. And he was in the sauna. I'm sitting there in the sauna. And there's this dude like across from me doing these weird breathwork cycles. And I started chatting with him about it. And that's who he was, the Renegade Pharmacist. And then he wound up coming on my show. My sons and I did his multi-week breathwork training, which is great. And so, yeah, very familiar with him. But then the hypoxia, back to your 3 steps, you do the several minutes of the hypoxic breath hold. And then what did you say the third one is?
It's a pressure phase. So after that, you just breathe in, take a full inhale, and do the Valsalva maneuver, which is increasing internal pressure, similar to blowing up a difficult balloon or straining during your morning bowel movement. And so you increase pressure, and that trains those baroreceptors. So it's full on like increasing CO2, decreasing oxygen, increasing pressure, just a full adaptive breath work.
Okay. So as I'm doing this Valsalva not pooping maneuver, how long am I holding that one?
30 seconds.
Okay. So it's pretty quick, just basically like all out. It sounds kind of similar to like the end of, like a Wim Hof cycle where you breathe in, and just like try to shoot all the energy out the top of your head. Instead, this one, you're kind of doing like an internal pressure buildup. Yeah,
very similar. So like you said, the pressure is applied to the Wim Hof method. I believe on the Soma breath as well. It's been a while since I've done it. Maybe you can speak to that. But yeah, it just incorporates at the very end, increases the pressure, just helps drop you in, and then Often I'll use a pulse oximeter, which measures your oxygen levels. Most of the time I'm still hypoxic, even though I'm still doing the pressure change. So that's just an interesting caveat.
So if somebody was going to quantify, they're nerdy enough to do this with a pulse oximeter, what would you consider hypoxia to be? Like if somebody's normally at like whatever 97 to 99% oxygen saturation, what are you looking for hypoxia?
Anything below 90% is the hypoxic window, and the research tries to go around 80 to 90 in the intermittent hypoxic breathing literature. But even with this technique, it's not uncommon to dip below into the mid to high 70s temporarily as your body will adjust and bring it back. What I like about this is if you're dipping too low, just take a longer inhale, just take a longer breath, and you can go up and you can titrate just based on that pulse ox.
Okay, got it. Have you seen these gyms like the, or not gyms or devices, like the Cell Gym, which is just like a mask that you wear that brings the oxygen up and then down as a form of, I think they actually call it intermittent IHHT, intermittent hyperoxic hypoxic training.
Yeah, so this would just be a free version of that, and that's exactly what the machines do. Except you're breathing the whole time, so you don't get that CO2 fluctuation. It just decreases oxygen and then floods you, so you're getting that pulse of high and low oxygen.
Yeah, I know there's another unit called the Live O2 that you can use like while you're exercising. Same thing, but it's a good point. You don't get the CO2 effect that you're getting from just like manually doing it yourself.
But you could stack that with a different machine like you're doing yourself for a passive CO2 boost as well. So there's different ways to do it.
Climb inside your bubble boy suit and then put an IHHT device on, and best of both worlds, baby. Somebody's going to do it, by the way. I guarantee somebody's going to do it.
I have no doubt.
No way we could talk about environmental hormesis without diving into cold therapy. So what's your cold therapy practice?
So for years, I've been going in the river before going to the gym. And because it's a river, I go mid-fall to early spring when the water is cold. But I got to tell you the truth, Ben, that my schedule has changed due to an aggressive beaver taking over my spot. So there I am one morning in the river, just up to the neck, just enjoying myself. And I hear this breathing behind me. I turn around, and about 10 feet away, I just see a beaver's head swimming at me and then just disappears under the water. And that was more frightening than the cold. So I just bolted to the
accompanied by the Jaws side effects.
Exactly. So I bolted to the shore, looked back, and there's this beaver just smacking his tail on the water. And I was like, oof. So I tried it again a couple times that week, had a similar run in. I wasn't in the water. I checked the scene. But needless to say, I'm doing cold showers for now. And my routine is 3 to 5 minutes before going to the gym. And even though I know there's a bunch of physiological benefits, I primarily do it for discipline because I never want to do it. I never want to get in the cold. But every time that I do experience that discomfort for 3 to 5 minutes, I'm always glad I did. And it's a good way to start your day off with a win.
You're the third guy on the podcast. I think Brad Kearns and Thomas Seeger also brought this up, who recommends the cold therapy before the gym. It's hard to explain unless you actually do it, like unless you've actually tried it, but it is one of the best free versions of a pre-workout drink that, it beats the pants off any pre-workout blend. And I know for some people, it almost creates too much friction. It's like, wait, first you told me I got to go to the gym and suffer for a little while. And now you're telling me I got to get cold before I do it. But if you are demotivated to exercise or whatever, like back to the jet lag travel thing for me, if there's any resistance to exercise and you just even like hotel room, like you said, like 2-minute cold shower, total game changer pre-workout.
Absolutely. It's so simple. I love it. I write in the book how Beethoven allegedly would put cold water on his face before he composed just to wake his system up. That's exactly what the cold does. It's like the best biohack ever. It's just a quick 2 minutes, you're good to go. It's like a shot of coffee.
Yeah, and then there's effects. Beyond just exercise. Like I think you mentioned cancer in the book for cold, which I thought was interesting because you hear about cancer hyperthermia. Like it's big in Europe, like hyperthermic treatments to enhance the efficacy of chemo, or as like an adjunct therapy with chemo, or as its own protocol for heat shock proteins and cancer cell cytotoxicity. But I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about cold in cancer.
Yeah. So In the book, I talk about cold being specifically used to counteract some of the negative side effects to chemotherapy, particularly peripheral neuropathy, which is this nerve damage that typically appears in the hands and feet. And I want to stress that this condition is excruciating. I've had patients describe it as if they are walking on glass or someone's holding a lighter under their foot. And worse still is that it can persist for years after the treatment has ended. So it's a big thing. And if we could alleviate that with simple cold, that would be great. That's exactly what the research has shown. So what they do is place cold gloves and socks on patients undergoing chemotherapy. They apply this chilly treatment 15 minutes before and keep it on until 15 minutes after. What the results show is that it can almost completely abolish chemotherapy-induced peripheral neuropathy against the most commonly used chemotherapeutics, which is huge, absolutely huge. And then this same treatment is also applied to the scalp to help mitigate hair loss. And I absolutely love that. This is a perfect example of how we can use environmental hormesis to protect function.
Yeah, it makes me think too about the protocol they use in this study with the cooling gloves and cooling socks. Is that something people can just purchase? Like, do you know if that's available or if it's just more of like a medical technology they used?
No, you can absolutely purchase it. I checked on Amazon, believe it or not, when I was writing the book, and there's a bunch of cool mittens and socks that individuals can buy.
There would have to be, considering how many like underwear companies have popped up. You know, there's probably Brian Johnson is partially responsible for and this is great for making more widespread the notion that, yeah, like if you're going in the sun and your boys are getting hot, you're going to decrease your sperm count. So now you can get like snowballs underwear and ice diaper underwear to keep the testicles cool while you're in the sauna. So you could do the same thing for things like, you know, cooling the body if you didn't have access to jumping in cold water with like gloves, socks, cap, etc.
Yeah, and the underlying mechanisms here why that helps out with chemotherapy is when you apply cold to the surface, the blood vessels will constrict, which reduces blood flow. So that means less exposure to the chemotherapy's toxicity to those affected areas. I mean, that's ultimately why it works. And you're right, you can apply that to anywhere in the body if you would like to, but this one that I talk about in the book is specific to peripheral neuropathy.
Yeah, and related to cancer, you point out the power of cold, especially in combination with chemo, but then you have, I think what you described as the most robust non-pharmacological intervention for cancer that exists.
Yeah, so that was a statement from a paper published in Nature Communications by Pamato and Watson. And I love it so much is because it showcases the collective data on caloric restriction and fasting in regards to its anti-cancer properties. Now, I want to be clear here because this is kind of a taboo subject. There is no human clinical trials evaluating prolonged fasting for a treatment for cancer. Not one. And I find that unbelievably fascinating, given the fact that we have robust animal studies, strong epidemiological studies, and there are shared physiological mechanisms between mammals that show fasting creates a potent anti-cancer environment. Prolonged fasting in particular activates genes and compounds that disrupt cancer, activates anti-cancer immunity, and improve mitochondrial function, along with a long list of other benefits. In fact, one of the biggest impacts fasting is metabolic in nature. And this is the whole principle of the metabolic theory of cancer that was pioneered by Otto Warburg and Carl and Getty Corey back in the 1920s. And since later work with Thomas Seyfried, great book I would recommend is Tipping Over the Truth by Travis Krusofferson, which he lays this out and really gets into that. And I'm a big advocate of metabolic theory of cancer, but I want to preface it with most cancers are glucose dependent. They just love sugar. But some types of cancer are metabolically flexible and can utilize ketones. So here I want to preface that metabolic theory of cancer is a good strategy and it's not a guarantee.
Yeah, I'm sure there must be publicly available data on which types of cancer would basically not be responsive to carbohydrate restriction or a ketogenic diet?
There is some, but it's a little hard to get down into the weeds with that just because there's so many cancers and each one hasn't been studied altogether. But just to throw this out here, only 10% of all cancers are due to DNA problems in the nucleus. All the other ones, 90%, are predominantly mitochondrial in nature and do benefit quite well with metabolic theory of cancer, metabolic treatments, that is, such as prolonged fasting and caloric restriction.
Okay, so in this case, because earlier we were talking about fasting and caloric restriction being kind of two different beasts. With cancer, is the calorie restriction as important as like the compressed feeding windows or some form of fasting?
In regards to cancer, it seems to be the most protective response is the ketones levels itself, like shifting the body over to ketones, because most cancers don't have that metabolic flexibility. And you're essentially creating an environment that is stacking the odds against cancer and improving overall healthy cells because they do have that metabolic flexibility.
Right. And unless someone say, well, okay, so if I wanted to control, say, like cancer growth, I could just stay on my current diet, but start using drinkable ketones, you would still have an issue with high levels of glucose and arguably even like, in some cases, high levels of amino acids and mTOR activation still contributing to the cancer problem, right? You couldn't just, basically what I'm saying is you can't just elevate ketones exogenously by drinking one of these drinks, but then just keep stuffing your face with carbs and protein if you wanted the best approach for cancer.
Right. Yeah. All the growth factors for cancer are going to be present. Insulin's going to be there. They're going to get a robust response of sugar, and that's just going to feed them. So ideally, you just want your whole body to be in a ketogenic state, and this can be done either through prolonged fasting, a well-formulated ketogenic diet, or dare I say even carnivore diet in some folks, to get a long-lasting response to get that anti-cancer environment.
Okay, got it. Now, a lot of people would hear you say carnivore diet as a therapy for cancer and say, well, what about all the red meat contributes to cancer studies?
Well, all the red meat studies, I don't want to disagree with them all, but they're, how do I say this? They could be improved. They could be improved greatly just due to their methodology. A lot of them don't distinguish between the different types of meat, and they don't account for different lifestyle factors that contribute into cancer. And a lot of nutritional studies actually, they try to isolate one particular thing, but it's a lifestyle. If meat was damaging and caused cancer, you would see it across the world, and you don't. Different populations have different results, which is reflective of an individual's lifestyle. And to my knowledge on the carnivore diet in regards to cancer, I'm unaware of any studies that have even looked at it. In fact, in regards to carnivore diet, there's only, as of writing this book, only one study out of Harvard, and it was a survey, and it didn't even touch cancer. It talked about type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and a lot of other types of conditions, which was astonishing, the results of that. So the carnivore diet itself is amazing, a lot for not only cardiovascular disease, autoimmune disease, and a bunch of other diseases, but in specific regards to cancer, I don't think that the evidence or research is out there yet. But physiologically, it makes sense.
But big difference between the the overweight, red-faced businessman or businesswoman throwing down an espresso martini and 20-ounce French cut ribeye mowing through the bread basket and the Brussels sprouts drenched in Parmesan cheese, 5 nights a week, and someone who's at home having grass-fed, grass-finished beef and maybe some organ meats and high-quality forms of carnivore nutrition in a controlled environment without alcohol, carbs, stress, circadian disruption, et cetera.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said.
Yeah. Okay. I know we're bouncing around, but there's so much in this book. Heat shock proteins, which I mentioned earlier, heat stress, I'm a big fan of it. We've talked about it a lot before on the podcast, but you have an interesting section where you talk about apparently what's a commonly prescribed pharmaceutical. I think it's a pharmaceutical. I believe it's called HCTZ. And then you present heat stress as a pharmacological alternative to that. Can you get into that?
So that the pharmacological agent is called hydrochlorothiazide, abbreviated HCTZ, just because no one can pronounce that. But I present it in the book as heat is heart medicine. That's the section of the book where I talk about this and lay out evidence of how repeated heat stress has been shown to prevent, treat, and even reverse several forms of cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure being one of them. And here's the contrast between hydrochlorothiazide. So it is one of the most commonly prescribed first-line treatments for hypertension, and at typical doses of 25 to 50 mg, and a patient can expect a blood pressure reduction of around 10 points on the systolic and 5 points on diastolic. Now, with heat, it generates similar, if not way greater results. And a study I bring up in the book is they looked at hypertensive patients who took 2 sauna sessions for 3 months. That's it. Just 2 sauna sessions, 3 months. And their average systolic reduction was 23 points.
Wait. You mean 2 sauna sessions total over 3 months, or like 2 per week for 3 months?
Oh, sorry. Good clarification. So 2 times a week for 3 months. Yeah. So their average systolic reduction was 23 points and their diastolic was 9 points. So that's huge. That's almost double of what the HCTZ pharmacological agent was. And these adaptive benefits, why that lowers the pressure, it was because of the adaptations, the heat stress, including improved blood vessel function, reduced arterial stiffness, improved baroresensitivity, and together, all of this lowered blood pressure and improved cardiovascular function. So in other words, heat stress is indeed cardiovascular medicine.
Especially if you do your resisted inspiratory muscle training while you're in the sauna, or you drag your bubble suit with the CO2 delivery into the sauna and do inspiratory muscle training in the sauna wearing your bubble suit with CO2.
Stack them up.
Yeah, just stack them up, baby. That's super interesting about blood pressure. I mean, if anyone struggles with blood pressure, automatically we've got 2 pretty potent natural methods of adaptive medicine for this already in this podcast. Now, what about heat stress? This is something I've wondered, and I'm pretty sure there's a link, but I will often do sauna more frequently when I'm traveling or when I'm about to do a big bout of traveling to strengthen the immune system. Is there something to that?
Absolutely. But context here matters in regards to, does heat stress help decrease sickness? Our resiliency is determined by how well our system is functioning. So even if someone is a regular sauna goer, they can still get sick if their recovery is poor, they're not sleeping good, their circadian rhythm is off, etc. So it's not a cure-all. That said, it is a powerful form of medicine because it mimics a fever, and it definitely activates our immune system. One single session will activate both branches of the immune system, the innate, which acts as our first line of defense, and our adaptive immune system, which creates antibodies for more targeted response. Heat stress will also increase our circulation, which improves immune surveillance. And then at the same time, speaking of your heat shock proteins, that will help our immune system recognize infected cells and compromised cells to help clear them out. And what's really cool is one single session will increase heat shock proteins. It'll peak for about 2 days. So essentially, you're priming your whole system for enhanced immunity for a couple days after one single session. And the last point here I want to make is heat stress will improve compounds that are antiviral in nature, such as interferon gamma, which will inhibit viral replication. So together, this is just a huge, easy, simple adaptive boost that you can make to improve overall immune function with the hopes of decreasing your ability to get sick, increase resiliency.
You think there's anything to the idea of doing it while you're already sick?
I go back and forth with that. My idea is if you're already sick, your body's already stressed out, I wouldn't add additional stress to it. Just focus on recovery, sleep, hydration, the basic things that your body knows how to deal with and improves recovery too.
I want to come back to the carnivore diet real quick, because something I was thinking about since we had that exchange is that it does eliminate, I think this is one of the reasons it helps people who have pretty significant gut issues. It eliminates a lot of plant defense mechanisms that might be irritating to someone with autoimmune issues, especially at high doses. And yet, when you look at like the EGCG in green tea or curcumin or a lot of other bitter herbs and spices, they themselves as plant toxins can induce a little bit of hormetic stress. So aren't you missing out on some elements of adaptive medicine if you're going strict carnivore?
Yes and no. And here I would go back to where we're at in the body. We get challenges breaking down the body, and then recovery builds it back up, and we want balance. For a lot of people that go on carnivore diet, and I understand that perspective, I go on the carnivore diet myself for about 3 months every year, just because that's how long it takes me to get rid of a quarter of a cow. So I love it. I feel good on it.
All right. Cool.
But yeah, so that's what we're working with. And so for a lot of people that find great benefit with the carnivore diet, they may be overtaxing their body, and it just gives them a chance to to balance it back up. It gives the body a break because they're not consuming so many plant defense chemicals as their normal food. That being said, from adaptive standpoint, you're right. The goal is not to eliminate every stressor. The goal is to expose the system to small, brief challenges and so it can improve function. And I would say EGCG and curcumin are great examples of that adaptive principle, because at low doses, such as green tea or sprinkled turmeric onto your food, they act as hormetic stressors. In the body, this increases our internal defense systems and increases antioxidants in our repair pathways. And this response, interestingly enough, our body's response is often greater than that challenge. This leads to overall reductions in inflammation and acts as an overall net positive. However, there is a hormetic aspect to it. High levels of EGCG and curcumin, and most plant defense chemicals for that matter, will have the opposite effect. It'll be inflammatory, overwhelm the system, and cause more harm than good. So I'm less focused on diet ideology and more focused on function. If an individual function and feels good with no plants, that's fantastic. That's the right move for them at that particular time.
Yeah, and it's not like super black and white, huh? Because you could do a carnivore diet, and let's say, yeah, you aren't going to do a bunch of big ass salads, and bread hurts your gut, and you're not going to do alcohol, but you could do carnivore and have like a cup of green tea or antioxidant rich coffee in the morning. And then when you are preparing your meat, use some choice herbs like, rosemary, thyme, you mentioned turmeric, and kind of just like weave them in condiment style here and there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just listen to your body. I believe your body is the best doctor out there. You know your body better than anybody, and you know how it functions. So if you add in the rosemary and then brain fog starts coming, maybe not choose that. Maybe your body doesn't do good with rosemary. But yeah, the whole idea of small stressors added in to improve function, is rock solid, and it can be accomplished with the carnivore diet as well.
Yeah, there was one section in here for people who want to get the benefits of fasting but also stay swole. You have like this mineral trick for maintaining body mass. You know what I'm talking about?
So the mineral trick is good old-fashioned baking soda. So here's how it works, or why it works rather. So in prolonged fasting, ketone levels will rise, which is a good thing. That's what we want. But they need to be neutralized in order to be cleared from the body. So early on, the body uses sodium to accomplish this task. But after a few days, our sodium levels will start to drop, and this acts as a stress response. Cortisol will go up. Well, before I get there, when sodium levels drop, these are the symptoms of the keto flu. This is like fatigue, headaches, irritability. It's low sodium levels. That's the keto flu.
Yeah, a lot of people think it's just low blood glucose, but a lot of times it's just like mineral depletion.
So a great way to do that is just a pinch of salt, normal salt, depending on your duration of the fast, or baking soda. So that's one of the mechanisms. And then also the second issue is when ketones are acidic. So they create a mild form of metabolic acidosis. So to compensate, our body will break down protein to form ammonia to help act as a pH buffer. And baking soda deals with both. It replaces the sodium, and then the bicarbonate helps buffer that pH, so you don't have to break down protein for the body to compensate.
So if I have the average like kitchen teaspoon, how much of that in terms of baking soda are we talking?
That's a great question. There is considerable variation with sodium excretion between individuals during prolonged fasting. So a very conservative approach would be 3 to 4 grams of sodium bicarbonate. I believe that's a teaspoon. Yeah. And you want
that's like not a heaping teaspoon.
Right.
I've seen some studies where they did this to improve lactate buffering and sports performance in athletes, and they actually use small amounts for like 2 hours going into a competition. One of the reasons for that, for doing like a gram 4 times rather than say like 4 grams once, is the gastric distress that the higher doses of baking soda can cause. So I'm assuming if you're fasting and you want to maintain muscle, or if you're shifting into ketosis and you want to ease the transition, that doing a few almost 1 gram, like just the tip of a teaspoon a few times a day would be a reasonable approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, spread out throughout the day. That's the best approach to alleviate, like you said, the gastric stuff and all those negative side effects. That's a perfect approach. And if you're doing like a 24 to 48 hour fast, you're not really going to get into the high ketones where the metabolic acidosis is a factor. Just simple sea salt, just get some electrolytes, and that's going to help you out to get over the ketogenic hump, the keto flu hump. It's just going to make you feel better and the experience just more enjoyable.
Bold font on page 309 of your book. It says, a person's flexibility is directly linked to their perception of pain. Tell me about that.
So this one's fascinating. I learned this myself in the book. I was shocked. So most people think stretching is about lengthening the muscles. Okay, but in most cases, range of motion is limited by our nervous system. So this means that our brain acts as a governor by restricting movement based on our perceived level of pain or instability. And perceived is the key word here, because when we perform novel movements or stretch, the receptors in our muscles, ligaments, and tendons will send information back to the brain. If the position feels unstable, the nervous system will increase tension to stop you. So think of it like when you just tweaked your back. Your whole spinal column, the muscles will just constrict and get really tight. This is a protective mechanism. So that's how stretching works. However, when you stretch and engage in novel movements that slightly or introduce new ranges of motion, you're essentially training your brain and your nervous system that these positions are safe, which ultimately allows you to bend, twist, and move more freely and reduce musculoskeletal pain.
Okay, got it. Have you ever come across the concept of voodoo flossing or heard of it?
Yes, years ago. And it's essentially compression and then movement alongside that. Is that correct?
Yeah, you kind of like using an elastic band. I learned this from Cody Strodtman. And you'll wrap around a joint, and that limits the pain and allows you to kind of like retrain the muscle to move through pain-free range of motion. So like if you have tennis elbow, for example, I'll hold up my arm here. You'd like wrap an elastic band above and below the joints, the same elastic band at like 50% blockage, making sure that you still have blood flow returning to the fingers. And then you kind of like move the arm for a couple of minutes through different ranges of motion. And I think it's using similar mechanisms as what you've just described in terms of like putting the muscle on stretch, actually decreasing pain perception. And beyond just like injury prevention in terms of mobility, you actually get this like loss of pain when you stretch or when you're like stretch with that voodoo floss on.
And have you used this practice before?
Yeah, I use it for my knee all the time. Like I just got back from several days of snowboarding in the Alps, and I was voodoo flossing my left knee every morning before I went out. Total game. And we're talking just like 2 minutes. Wrap above the joint, below the joint. You could just go to YouTube, or I'll put a video in the show notes of how to do it. And you just need an elastic band, which is super easy to travel with anywhere in the world. And combining that with stretching, I think is super underrated for pain.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Thank you for that. I'll have to look into that.
Cody Strodtman, we barely even scratched the surface of everything that's in the rise of adaptive medicine. I did want to ask you, you're obviously licensed and practice in Portland, Oregon, but do you do like telemedicine, anything like that, if anybody ever wanted to hop on a phone call with you?
Yeah, most of my work I do is remote, and I still do one-on-one consulting for people who want to improve their health and performance. But then most of my focus now is working with my wife, Dr. Cindy, through our program called Fertility for Two. We work with couples who are trying to conceive by helping both partners improve their health and fertility so they can expand their family and model healthy behaviors to their children.
I thought Fertility for Two was like how to have twins.
Fertility for Two just means we treat both partners, man and female.
All right, got it.
Yeah.
Got it. That's cool.
Yeah, everything we do is online, and we work with couples from all over the country. And if anybody would want to check us out or learn more, just hop on to adaptive-medicine.com, fertilityfor2.com, or anything social, Fertility for Two. That's the handle.
Okay. I'll link to all this in the show notes. So you learned how to lower your blood pressure, but also you learned if you get some of those like ice pack underwear and do a call with Cody and his wife, or use their Fertility for Two, higher chances that you will populate the planet. BenGreenfieldLife.com/adaptive are the show notes. I'll link to everything that Dr. Cody and I talked about. Dude, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, folks. Thanks for watching.
Do you want free access to comprehensive show notes, my weekly roundup newsletter, cutting edge research and articles, top recommendations from me for everything that you need to hack your life, and a whole lot more. Check out bengreenfieldlife.com. It's all there. bengreenfieldlife.com. See you over there. Most of you who listen don't subscribe, like, or rate this show. If you're one of those people who do, then huge thank you. But here's why it's important to subscribe, like, and or rate this show. If you do that, that means we get more eyeballs, we get higher rankings, and the bigger the Ben Greenfield Life Show gets, the bigger and better the guests get, and the better the content I'm able to deliver to you. So hit subscribe, leave a ranking, leave a review if you got a little extra time. It means way more than you might think. Thank you so much.